Michael Carter had always dreamed of having a son. In his small American town, the idea of carrying forward the family name meant everything to him. He wasn't a cruel man by nature, but his heart was clouded by the weight of expectations, his own, his family's, and society's. When his wife, Emily, gave birth on a stormy night in the county hospital, Michael's pulse raced with anticipation. He was sure this would be the moment he would hold his little boy, the heir he had prayed for, but fate had other plans. "It's a girl," the nurse said softly, placing the tiny newborn into Emily's trembling arms. Emily's eyes filled with tears of joy as she kissed the baby's forehead. "She's beautiful, Michael," she whispered, waiting for her husband to share her happiness. But Michael's face froze. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold silence. "A girl?" he muttered under his breath, his disappointment cutting deeper than he imagined. He looked away, unable to bring himself to touch her. In the days that followed, Michael grew more distant. Emily tried to comfort him, reminding him that a child, no matter boy or girl, was a blessing. But Michael's stubbornness turned into bitterness. He barely looked at the baby, and when Emily called her Lily, Michael flinched at the name as if it didn't belong in his world. One cold December night when Emily was asleep, Michael made a decision that would haunt him forever. He wrapped the baby in a thin blanket, avoiding her innocent gaze, and walked out into the dark streets. His steps echoed against the silence of the sleeping town as he carried his own daughter toward the edge of the alley, behind the dumpsters. The infant whimpered, her tiny fists waving helplessly. For a moment, Michael hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, battling the war between love and pride. But pride won. He laid her down gently on the ground near the trash, whispering under his breath, "Forgive me." He walked away, his shoulders heavy, his ears still catching the faint cries behind him. Moments later, another man walked those same streets. His name was Daniel Brooks, a garbage collector known in the neighborhood for his kindness despite his rough life. He had no children of his own, though he had always dreamed of being a father. As he reached the dumpster, he heard a sound, soft, desperate cries piercing through the winter air. Daniel set down his cart and bent closer. His eyes widened in shock. "A baby?" he gasped. Carefully, he picked her up, feeling how fragile and cold she was. The blanket barely kept her warm. He pressed her against his chest, shielding her from the biting wind. "Don't worry, little one," Daniel whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I've got you now." In that moment, Daniel's life changed forever. What Michael abandoned out of pride, Daniel embraced out of love. Daniel hurried back to his small apartment, clutching the baby tightly against his chest. His old pickup truck was parked a few blocks away, but he didn't want to waste a second in the freezing night. When he finally closed the door behind him, the warmth of the room wrapped around them both. He placed the baby on his worn-out couch, quickly grabbing an old quilt to cover her shivering body. He stared at her tiny face. Her lips were trembling, her eyes half closed, yet there was an innocence that pierced straight through his heart. Daniel felt something he had never felt before, an overwhelming urge to protect her, to give her the life she deserved. He dialed his neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly widow who had raised 3 children of her own. I found a baby," Daniel stammered when she picked up. "What do you mean, found a baby?" she asked, startled. "In the alley. Someone left her there," he said, his voice breaking. Minutes later, Mrs. Jenkins arrived, bringing warm milk and a bottle. She showed Daniel how to hold the baby properly, how to feed her slowly so she wouldn't choke. The baby latched onto the bottle, her tiny hands curling around Daniel's fingers. He felt his chest tighten, a mix of sorrow and joy swirling inside him. "She's beautiful," Mrs. Jenkins whispered. "You can't just hand her over to the system. She needs love, not another cold foster home." Daniel nodded, his decision made. "She's mine now," he said firmly. "If no one else wanted her, I'll be her father." From that night onward, Daniel devoted his life to raising the baby girl. He named her Lily, not knowing that her mother had already chosen the same name in the hospital. It felt like destiny, as if Lily was meant to carry that name no matter what. Life wasn't easy. Daniel worked long hours collecting trash, often coming home exhausted and sore. But every night when he held Lily in his arms, all the pain faded. She was his light in the darkness, his reason to keep moving forward. As the years passed, Lily grew into a bright and cheerful child, She followed Daniel everywhere, asking questions about everything she saw. She loved books, always curious, always learning. Daniel, though not highly educated himself, encouraged her to study. He worked double shifts to buy her school supplies, skipping meals so she could have what she needed. Lily never felt the absence of a mother or father because Daniel gave her both. He braided her hair in the mornings, attended her school plays, and clapped the loudest at every small achievement. He wasn't just raising her, he was shaping her future with every sacrifice. What Daniel didn't know was that fate was quietly weaving the threads of Lily's story, leading her back toward the man who had once abandoned her. By the time Lily turned 10, she had already shown signs of brilliance. Teachers at her elementary school often called Daniel for meetings, but unlike most parents who dreaded them, Daniel always went with pride. "Mr. Brooks," her teacher once said, adjusting her glasses, "Lily has a gift. She's one of the brightest students I've ever taught. She asks questions beyond her age, and she's deeply compassionate toward her classmates." Daniel felt his chest swell with pride. "That's my girl," he said softly, glancing at Lily, who sat with her books clutched to her chest, beaming. At home, Daniel kept encouraging her. "Baby girl, you can be anything you want in this world," he would tell her, even as he rubbed the soreness out of his arms after a long day of lifting garbage cans. "Even a doctor?" she once asked, her big blue eyes shining. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Especially a doctor. The world needs people like you." From that day, Lily carried the dream like a torch. She read every book she could find, begged Daniel to take her to the library, and spent hours studying. Sometimes when Daniel couldn't afford certain books, she would sit on the library floor for hours, copying notes by hand. Money was always tight. There were nights when Daniel skipped dinner so Lily wouldn't have to, but he never complained. Seeing her thrive was all the reward he needed. One winter evening, as they sat together with the heater humming softly, Lily asked, "Dad, why don't I have a real mom and dad like the other kids?" Daniel froze. His heart ached at the question he knew would come someday. He looked into her innocent eyes and replied, "Sweetheart, families aren't about blood. Families are about love. I chose you, and you chose me. That's stronger than anything else in this world." Lily threw her arms around him, whispering, "You're the best dad ever." That night, as Daniel tucked her into bed, he prayed silently, "Lord, give me the strength to keep her safe, to see her dreams come true." The years rolled on, and Lily blossomed into a young woman with ambition burning in her heart. She worked hard in high school, earning top grades and winning scholarships. Daniel worked even harder, often coming home past midnight, but he never missed a single important moment in her life. On her graduation day, when Lily walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Daniel stood in the crowd with tears streaming down his face. He clapped until his hands hurt, shouting, "That's my girl." Lily spotted him in the sea of faces, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew she wouldn't be where she was without him. He wasn't just her father, he was her hero. But far away in another corner of the same town, Michael Carter, the man who had abandoned her, was battling his own demons. Life hadn't gone the way he wanted, and soon destiny would bring him face to face with the daughter he never thought he'd see again. College was a whole new world for Lily. She walked onto campus with determination in her stride, ready to chase the dream she had carried since childhood, to become a doctor. The halls buzzed with students from every background, but Lily stood out. Not just for her intelligence, but for the humility and kindness Daniel had instilled in her. Every evening, Daniel called her from his old flip phone. "How's my doctor doing today?" he would ask. "Studying hard, Dad," Lily would reply with a smile, even on nights when she was exhausted from endless lectures and lab work. Daniel often worked extra routes to help with expenses that scholarships didn't cover. His hands grew rougher, his back weaker, but he never told Lily how much he was struggling. He wanted her to focus on her future, not his hardships. One weekend, Lily came home to surprise him. She found him asleep in the old recliner, his work boots still on, his hands calloused and scarred. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I'll make it worth it, Dad, I promise." Through sheer dedication, Lily excelled. She spent hours in the library, volunteered at hospitals, and built a reputation as someone who not only studied, Medicine but embodied compassion. Patience she shadowed during training, always smiled when she entered the room. Her presence felt like hope. Meanwhile, Daniel grew older, but his pride in Lily grew stronger. He kept a scrapbook of every achievement, her certificates, pictures, and newspaper mentions. Whenever neighbors teased him about raising a girl who wasn't his blood, Daniel would smile and say, "She's mine in every way that matters." But not far away, Michael Carter's life was unraveling. After Emily passed away years earlier, his bitterness only deepened. He had no children, no one to carry his name. His business ventures failed, friends drifted away, and loneliness became his constant companion. One evening, Michael collapsed at home, clutching his chest. The ambulance rushed him to the county hospital, the same place where Lily was now completing her residency. As fate would have it, the young doctor assigned to his case was none other than Lily. She walked into the room, her white coat neatly pressed, her stethoscope hanging around her neck. Her warm smile greeted the frail man on the bed. "Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Lily Brooks. I'll be taking care of you." Michael looked up, his tired eyes meeting hers. For a moment, something familiar stirred in his chest. A pang he couldn't quite explain. Her face, her eyes, there was something hauntingly recognizable. "Brooks?" he whispered weakly. "Yes," Lily said kindly, checking his chart. "That's my name." Michael's lips trembled. He stared at her as though the past had come alive in front of him. A memory from decades ago, dark alleys, a crying baby, and his own shame rushed back into his mind. Could it be? The girl he abandoned, now standing before him as a doctor? Michael's chest tightened, but not just from illness. His heart pounded as he stared at the young woman before him, the doctor with kind eyes who reminded him of someone he had once cast aside. Lily noticed his unease. "Are you in pain, Mr. Carter?" she asked gently, adjusting the IV line. He swallowed hard. "Carter," he whispered. "Yes, that's me." Lily nodded, making a note on his chart. "Don't worry, Mr. Carter. You're in good hands. We'll do some tests and take care of you." But Michael wasn't listening. His mind drifted to that winter night years ago, when he had left a crying infant by the dumpsters. The memory was like a wound reopening, sharper now as he saw the life that infant had become. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "Your name?" he said shakily. "You said Brooks?" "Yes," Lily replied with a reassuring smile. "Daniel Brooks is my father. He raised me." Michael's breath caught, his eyes welled with tears, and for the first time in decades, he felt the crushing weight of his choices. Daniel Brooks, the garbage collector, of course. Who else would have been there that night? I knew a man named Daniel once," he muttered, his voice breaking. Lily looked up curiously but didn't think much of it. She was focused on her duty. "Rest now. We'll get your results soon." When she left the room, Michael turned his face to the wall, tears sliding down his cheeks. "That's her, my daughter, the child I threw away." That night, Daniel arrived at the hospital to pick Lily up after her long shift. She ran into his arms the moment she saw him. "Dad, I had such a strange day," she said as they walked to the parking lot. "One of my patients. There was something about him. He kept staring at me like he knew me." Daniel brushed it off with a chuckle. "You've got one of those faces, kiddo. People feel like they've known you forever." But inside, Michael's name, Carter, echoed in Daniel's mind. He remembered that night vividly. The blanket, the cries, the moment he found Lily. Could it be the same man? He chose not to tell her, not yet. Over the next few days, Lily continued to care for Michael. She was patient and gentle, explaining every procedure. The more time Michael spent with her, the more guilt consumed him. One evening, as she adjusted his oxygen mask, Michael whispered, "You remind me of someone I once knew. Someone I lost." Lily smiled kindly. "Well, whoever they were, I hope they'd be proud of the person I've become." Her words cut through Michael like a blade. He wanted to tell her the truth, to fall at her feet and beg forgiveness, but fear kept his lips sealed. For now, the hospital room grew quieter each passing day. Machines beeped steadily, nurses moved in and out. But Michael Carter's world had shrunk, down to a single face, the doctor who visited him, morning and evening. Lily's presence was like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. She never rushed, never treated him as just another patient. She spoke with warmth, asked about his comfort, even told him little stories about the staff to make him smile. And each time, Michael's guilt pressed harder on his chest than the illness itself. One afternoon, while Lily checked his blood pressure, he couldn't hold back any longer. "Doctor, may I ask you something personal?" His voice cracked. Lily looked at him with curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Carter, what's on your mind? You said Daniel Brooks is your father?" "Yes," Lily answered with a proud smile. "The best man in the world. He raised me alone, worked harder than anyone I know. Everything I am today is because of him." Michael's throat tightened. Shame washed over him. She should be saying my name. She should be my pride. But I threw it all away. "And your mother?" he asked softly. Lily paused, her smile fading just a little. "I never knew her. Dad told me she wasn't there when I was born. But he made sure I never felt unloved." Michael's eyes burned with tears. Emily, his late wife, the woman who had cradled their newborn with joy, only to lose her child to his pride. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Lily tilted her head. "Sorry? For what?" He shook his head quickly. "Just sorry for asking so many questions." But Lily sensed something deeper. She didn't press him, though. She believed in giving her patients peace, not prying into their wounds. That evening, after finishing her shift, Lily found Daniel waiting outside as always. He had a thermos of coffee in his hands and his familiar comforting smile. "Long day, huh?" he said, opening the truck door for her. "Yeah," Lily sighed. "There's this patient, Michael Carter. Dad, he's different. It's like he knows me somehow. He asks about you, about my life. It feels strange." Daniel froze at the name, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. He had kept the secret buried for so long, but now fate was dragging it into the light. "Michael Carter, you said?" Daniel asked quietly. "Yes, do you know him?" Lily asked, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. Daniel forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just a common name, that's all." But deep inside, he knew. He remembered that night vividly, the night he found her in the cold. Michael Carter was the man who had left her to die. Daniel clenched his jaw. He couldn't let Lily know yet, not until she was ready, because when the truth came out, it would change everything. Daniel guided Lily into a quiet waiting room, away from the noise of the hospital. She was shaking. Her hands pressed against her face as silent tears slipped through her fingers. "Sweetheart, breathe," Daniel whispered, rubbing her back. "It's a lot to take in." She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad," he admitted it. "Michael Carter. He's the one who left me. All these years I thought my real parents were just gone, but he was here, alive, living his life while you carried the weight of his choices." Daniel's chest tightened. He had always feared this moment. He cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands. Listen to me, Lily. Blood doesn't make a father. Love does. And I'll never stop being your dad. Her lips trembled. But what do I do now? He's dying, Dad. And he's asking for forgiveness. Daniel's heart ached. Part of him wanted to shield her from more pain, to tell her to walk away. But he also knew that forgiveness was more about freeing one's own heart than excusing the wrong. That's your choice, baby girl, Daniel said gently. You don't owe him anything. But if you want peace, maybe facing him one last time will give you that. The next day, Lily walked into Michael's room again. He looked weaker, paler, his breath shallow. His eyes lit up when he saw her, though shame still clouded his expression. You came back, he whispered. Yes, Lily said softly, pulling up a chair. Not because I accept what you did, but because I need to understand. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I was a fool, Lily. I thought having a son meant everything. I thought my worth depended on it. When you were born, I couldn't see the blessing standing right in front of me. I can't change what I did, but not a day has passed that I didn't regret it. Lily's heart twisted. She saw the pain in his eyes, the crumbling shell of a man who had been consumed by pride. And yet, she couldn't erase the image of that helpless baby left in the cold. You don't get to call me your daughter, she said firmly, her voice shaking. You gave up that right the night you abandoned me. The man who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, that's my father. Michael nodded slowly, tears sliding down his face. You're right. He's the father you deserved. But please, before I leave this world, let me say one thing. I am proud of you, even if I don't deserve to be. Lily's throat tightened. She wanted to hate him, to turn away and never look back. But something inside her, a mixture of compassion and sorrow, kept her rooted to the chair. I can't erase what you did, she whispered. But I won't let your mistake poison the rest of my life. I forgive you, not for you, but for me. Michael broke down, his body trembling with sobs. For the first time, he felt the weight lift, the forgiveness he never thought he would receive. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a mix Emily had long grown used to. But today the air felt heavier. She stood outside the room where her latest patient lay, man whose chart showed heart failure. Advanced and irreversible. She had read dozens of such cases, but something about this one gnawed at her. When she stepped inside, the man looked older than his actual age. His hair gray and face deeply lined. His eyes, though weak, carried a strange intensity. He glanced up at her, and for a moment their gazes locked. Doctor. His voice cracked barely above a whisper. What's your name? Dr. Emily Carter, she replied with a professional smile. He stared at her, a flicker of something unspoken passing across his tired face. Emily? He repeated almost to himself. His eyes watered, but he quickly turned his head away. Emily shook off the moment and began her routine check. She listened to his chest, noted his vitals, and adjusted his chart. Yet she couldn't ignore the way his hands trembled. Not from illness, but from emotion. The next day when she returned, he seemed restless. He clutched at her wrist as she checked his pulse. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice hoarse. Something I've carried for too long. Emily looked at him with concern. You should save your strength. We can talk when you're feeling better. But he shook his head. No, I may not get another chance. His eyes filled with tears. I once made a mistake, the kind that destroys a man's soul. I abandoned my own child. Emily froze, her breath catching in her chest. The words sliced through her like a blade. For a moment, the sounds of the hospital faded, the beeping machines, the shuffle of nurses, the hum of conversation outside. All she could hear was his trembling confession. I wanted a son, he continued, voice breaking. But when my wife gave me a daughter, I left her. Like trash. I've lived every day since drowning in that guilt. Emily's hand shook as she set the stethoscope down. Her mind whirled, memories flashing like lightning. George's gentle smile, his story of finding her in a dumpster, the questions she had asked as a child about where she came from. She stared at the man, realization dawning slowly but painfully. The truth pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. This man, this frail, broken man, was her father. She said nothing, her throat too tight to speak. He didn't know. He couldn't know. Tears blurred her vision as she backed toward the door. She needed air. She needed to think. The walls of the room closed in around her, and she fled into the hallway, her heart pounding. Outside, she leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold floor. Her hands covered her face as sobs racked her body. After all these years, she had found him. Or maybe fate had brought him back to her. But the question now loomed heavy over her heart. Could she face him as the man who had left her to die? Or as a dying patient who needed her care? Emily sat in her office late one evening, the glow of her desk lamp casting soft shadows across the framed certificates on the wall. She stared at the chart in her hand, her mind drifting back to the life she had lived with George, the man who had raised her when no one else wanted her, the man who had picked her from the cold and given her warmth, from despair and given her hope. Her heart tightened as she thought about the man in the hospital bed, her biological father, the man who had abandoned her in a dumpster like discarded trash. She had wrestled with these conflicting emotions for days. How could she feel compassion for someone who had caused her so much pain, even before she was old enough to understand what pain meant? But there was George's voice in her heart, steady and kind. Never let bitterness steal your humanity. Emily, you're better than the world that hurt you. The next morning, Emily walked into the hospital room. Her father, Richard, looked weaker than before, his breath shallow and uneven. His eyes opened slowly and locked onto hers. This time there was no mistaking the recognition. You, his voice cracked, broken and raspy. Tears welled in his eyes. You're her. You're the baby I threw away. Emily's throat tightened. Hearing it said aloud in his own trembling voice was like reopening an old wound, but she didn't look away. Yes, she said quietly. That was me. He wept then, his body shaking against the sheets. I was a fool. I thought I wanted a son so badly that I didn't see the gift God had already given me. I live every day with that regret. His voice broke completely. I don't deserve forgiveness. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the chair beside his bed. For a moment she hesitated, but then she sat down. You're right, she whispered. You don't deserve it. But forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it. Richard's tears fell freely, his body racked with the weight of decades of shame. I'm sorry, Emily, he said, clutching her hand weakly. I'm so sorry. For the first time in her life, Emily felt pity for him, not as her father, but as a broken man crushed by his mistakes. She didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't. But she allowed herself to let go of the hatred she had carried silently for so long. As the machines beeped softly in the background, Richard took one final ragged breath. His hand went limp in hers, and just like that, he was gone. Emily sat still for a long time, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for the father she had lost. She had never truly had him. She was crying for the closure, for the end of a chapter that had haunted her entire life. When she finally rose, George was waiting for her outside the room. His warm, steady eyes met hers, and she fell into his embrace. He's gone, she whispered. George kissed her forehead gently. But you're still here, sweetheart. And you'll never be alone. Not as long as I'm breathing. And for the first time in years, Emily felt free. The days after her father's death were strangely quiet. Emily found herself walking through life with a lighter heart, as if some invisible chain had finally broken. For years, she had carried an unnamed weight, an emptiness tied to questions she couldn't answer. Now, though the answers had been painful, they had given her something she never thought she'd find. Closure. George, ever steady, stood by her side through it all. He never once asked her what had happened in that hospital room. He didn't need to. He could see in her eyes that she had faced the hardest truth of her life and had come out stronger. One evening, Emily and George sat together on the porch of their small home. The sunset painted the sky with shades of orange and violet. Emily leaned back in her chair, holding a cup of tea between her hands. You know, she said softly, when I was a kid, I used to wonder why I didn't have real parents like the other kids, why I didn't belong anywhere. She glanced at George, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. But the truth is, I did belong somewhere. I belonged with you. George's lips curved into a tender smile. Sweetheart, you've always been mine. From the very moment I found you, I didn't need blood to call you my daughter. My heart already knew. Tears filled Emily's eyes, but they weren't the heavy tears of grief this time. They were warm, healing tears. She reached for George's hand and squeezed it gently. You're the only father I've ever needed. Over the following weeks, Emily threw herself back into her work. But something was different. She no longer carried anger hidden beneath her lab coat. Instead, she carried compassion, the kind that came from understanding suffering firsthand. She began taking extra time with her patients, not just treating their illnesses, but listening to their fears. Families noticed. Patients remembered her warmth long after their visits ended. Her colleagues admired the way she balanced professionalism with a depth of kindness rare in the medical world. One afternoon, as Emily walked down the hospital corridor, she overheard a little girl whisper to her mother, "That doctor smiles like she really cares about me." Emily paused, her chest tightening, and she smiled to herself. That little girl had no idea how true her words were. Her painful beginnings had not defined her. They had refined her. Months later, Emily was invited to give a speech at a medical conference. She stood on stage, looking out at hundreds of faces. She spoke not only about medicine, but about humanity, resilience, and the power of love to heal wounds deeper than any scalpel could reach. As she concluded, she said, "I'm not standing here today because of the family I was born into. I'm here because of the family that chose me, and the love that saved me." The audience rose in a standing ovation. George, sitting proudly in the front row, wiped a tear from his cheek. In that moment, both father and daughter knew they had built something stronger than fate itself. The applause from her speech echoed in Emily's mind for days. But more than the recognition, it was the feeling of peace that stayed with her. For so long, she had searched for acceptance in places it would never be found. Now she knew. Her worth was never tied to her beginnings, but to the love she had chosen to embrace. Life with George settled into a comfortable rhythm. He was older now, moving a bit slower, his hair completely silver, but his eyes still carried that same unwavering strength Emily had relied on all her life. Every evening, they'd shared dinner at the small wooden table in their kitchen, laughing about little things and enjoying the kind of bond many families longed for. One night, as they finished their meal, George set down his fork and looked at her. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but serious, "I won't be around forever. I just want you to know, no matter what happens to me, you've made my life more meaningful than I ever imagined." Emily reached across the table, taking his weathered hand into hers. "Don't talk like that," she whispered, her throat tightening. "You're my world, George. You gave me everything. You saved me." George smiled, his eyes misting over. "No, sweetheart. You saved me. You gave me purpose when I had none. I thought I was just a garbage man picking up the world's waste. But the day I found you, that was the day I found treasure." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks, and she leaned over to hug him. In that embrace, she knew no matter what the future held, their love was eternal. Years passed. Emily's career flourished. She became a respected doctor, known not just for her skill but for her heart. Patients often said she made them feel safe, like someone truly cared. And George, though aging, remained her anchor, always cheering her on, always proud. When George eventually grew frail, Emily was there for him, just as he had been there for her. She cared for him with the same devotion he had once shown a helpless baby left in the cold. And when his time came to pass, he left this world in peace, knowing he had raised a daughter who carried his love into everything she did. Emily mourned him deeply, but she did not feel abandoned. Not this time. George had taught her that family was not defined by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and the choice to stand by someone no matter what. Years later, as she walked through the hospital where she worked, Emily noticed a young, frightened child sitting alone in the waiting room. The little girl's clothes were worn, her eyes downcast. Emily's heart ached instantly. She sat beside her, offering a gentle smile, the same way George had once smiled at her when she was lost and unwanted. "Hi there," Emily said softly. "My name's Dr. Emily. You don't have to be afraid. You're safe now." The child looked up, her eyes wide with a glimmer of hope. And in that moment, Emily knew her story had come full circle. George's love lived on through her, and she would carry it forward, saving lives, healing hearts, and proving to the world that no one was ever truly disposable. Because she had learned, in the most painful and beautiful way, that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the unlikeliest places.